Morning all. Hopefully this is all working since I've been forced to use the new YouTube studio now. And I was sticking with Classic just because it was familiar, but I guess we'll see. In fact, let me just open a separate window to check. Bit of lag, but we seem to be alright. Awesome. Okay, housekeeping. Let's see. Not feeling particularly well. Got the sniffles and stuff, and brain health isn't the best that it could be, perhaps. But that's probably a rational response in this day and age in which we find ourselves. But yeah, so I don't know again how much I'll be doing this week. Probably I'll just push through and do the usual, but we'll see, I guess. Subscribers. So my main channel is getting pretty close to 3,000 subscribers now, whereas we haven't even broken 100 over here, which seems odd because I do cross-promote and everything. So if you do us a favour, share the video. Do it now so that we can grab a few more people on to watch. That would be great. You know the shtick of the show. I just sound off about various things in the news, having done absolutely zero research. It's kind of half a news show, half a spoof, half you get to, well, that's three halves, but you get what I mean. Another third, you get to see me just kind of react and pull things out of my arse and react to things as I find out about them. So I apologise for any sniffles or sneezes, but yeah, here we go. Right, there's a lot of UK-centric news this week for some reason, but yeah, there we go. I guess things are kicking into gear around various things that are going on. Priti Patel, she is our Home Secretary at the moment. Some people are proclaiming how wonderful it is to have such a diverse cabinet of far-right Tories oppressing us. But personally, I think it doesn't matter what colour somebody is, what race somebody is, what culture they happen to come from. What matters is that they're dicking us all over. And that's indeed what's happening, particularly with Priti Patel, who has the kind of name you might expect from a turncoat Bond girl, I suppose. There's been media reports that she's at loggerheads with the chiefs of the intelligence services here, MI5, MI6, and so on. This has been officially denied. Supposedly they're not holding back information from Ms. Patel, and aren't at loggerheads with her, which probably means that they are. But it's being said, warned you, it's being said that these are false stories, but they are extremely believable. The BBC currently still, goes through the effort of confirming sources and witnesses and things like that, and they are kind of playing both sides on this. It's been told that there's been no animosity or blazing rails between Priti Patel and Sir Philip, who's in charge, but they're not the right fit and don't get on. So there are arguments, but they're playing them down, which probably means they're worse than they're saying. But we'll see. She's certainly very, very hard right, and her ideas are probably not especially great for internal security in the UK, and I think there's lots of reasons to be worried, not just about Islamic terrorism, but a resurgence in Irish Republican and Loyalist terrorism. So you'd want people to get on, but you'd also want someone better than Priti Patel in the position. But there you go. Whitehall, which is like our a quick term for our civil service, I guess. They're looking for a human resources boss because there's a lot of tension between the civil service and Number 10. So the cabinet, which is the executive, that's the prime minister and the actual government, the executive part of government, they're recruiting a new civil servant to oversee human resources There isn't generally a huge amount of turnover when it comes to the civil service. That's why long-term members are called mandarins and things. But they've created this new role, which is £60,000 a year, to handle recruitment and treatment of staff, because there is so much tension in the government between the various bits and pieces. Dominic Cummings has been talking about hiring weirdos and freaks. So far that hasn't gone particularly well, because he ended up hiring a eugenicist as an advisor. Special advisors, it's shortened to SPADs, which sounds like the sort of thing you'd taunt the remedial class in school with as a nickname, but there you go. It hasn't gone particularly well, and it looks like they're wanting to hire and fire a lot of people and really sort of turn the whole civil service up on its head, which isn't a particularly great idea when it comes to continuity of governance and so on, but it shows how radical a shake-up this government wants to make, and not for the good. We've needed change in the UK government and the way it does things and the way it operates for a very long time. I'm just not sure Dominic Cummings and his cronies are the people to do it. There's TLDR, not TLDR, but TLDR News, did a kind of in-depth report on Cummings and his philosophy and the stuff that's listed in his blogs and all the rest of it. A lot of his actual ideas, if you strip away the ideological lens, they're actually pretty good, I think. He talks about things that do need changing and so on, but I don't think he's the person to do it, and I think his ideological blinkers mean that what he's seeking to do is actively dangerous to the government. We need reform, we need changes, we need scientific and research-led politics, I think, around the world, rather than ideological possession. But Cummings has his own ideological possession, his own set of blinkers on, which means he's going against what the research says in a lot of ways, unfortunately. So it's more like he's kind of excusing what he wants through what he presents as a non-partisan, non-ideological stance. And that's, I guess, always the problem. People being possessed by ideology who don't understand that they're possessed by ideology, but that seems to be what's going on here, unfortunately. I mean, look at drug policy, right? For years and years and years now, assorted governments have been commissioning reports, having special committees and so on, and the end result almost every time is it's more trouble than it's worth, legalize it, and control it and treat it on a medical basis, treat addiction on a medical basis. Yeah, expert after expert, study after study, committee after committee all says the same thing, but it won't fly with the public, so no government ever implements the recommended ideas, even though it would make for a better country, a better world, a better standard of living, would help with crime and addiction and all the associated health problems and social problems and so on. They just won't do it. I think this is a problem that we all have in a lot of ways. That people are just utterly unwilling to do what's right, or to educate the public about what we should do and why. You can look at Brexit as a fine example of that. Nobody set out to actually educate the public as to why the EU was a good thing, the things that it had done, really how much of a disaster it would be. There was just a lot of hectoring and lecturing, not a lot of explanation. There's been a real lack of leadership for decades now in most Western governments, I think, and a lot of populism, which turns your government into a windsock. It'll just twist this way and that wherever the tide of public opinion is going. You know, we probably wouldn't have banned hanging or execution of any kind under the current sort of set of people in charge, because they know that hanging and flogging and all the rest of it is popular with a certain quarter of the populace, which means there'd be a lot of unjust killings and so on. It's unfortunate. We have specialist politicians who don't really know that much about their fields that they're supposed to be operating in going against expertise because of what a relatively ignorant public wants. You've got to weigh and measure what's popular against what's effective, I think, and that's really severely missing, unfortunately. People will say elitism, but if I'm having my brain operated on, I want someone elite who is very intelligent, very educated, very practiced doing those operations on my brain. If I want my country run, I want the best of the best, not the best politician, but the best person. Unfortunately, democracy doesn't work particularly well for that, but it's still the better option compared to all the others that have been tried, to paraphrase Churchill. But it does have problems in that we now have this professional class of politicians. So we don't have scientists standing for election. We don't have economists standing for election. Not that there's any such thing as an expert economist, because it's all voodoo. But you take my point. The people in charge of education should be educators. The people in charge of health should be doctors. People in charge of technology should be scientists and engineers and technicians. And so it goes. Yeah, I'm ill. Deal with it. Alright, that turned into a rant. What else have we got? Coronavirus. 4 new UK cases amongst the ship evacuees. So several cruise ship passengers who were flown to Britain on Saturday have tested positive for the coronavirus, bringing the total number of cases in the UK to 13. So these 4 people were amongst 30 people who were repatriated, along with 2 Irish citizens, to begin a 14-day quarantine at Arrow Park Hospital in the Wirral. These are people from the Diamond Princess cruise liner that's been quarantined in Japan, and they've now been transferred to specialist NHS infection centres. It's not... So far, this COVID-19, the coronavirus, hasn't been that bad. I think it's still under the 1% fatality rate. And of course, we're a Western nation with pretty good hospitals and all the rest of it. So it's not going to be a huge problem here, even if it does go public, even if it goes viral and affects a huge number of people. We're not going to lose that many people, probably much less than the 1% that people have been bandying about. The cat may well be out of the bag when it comes to COVID-19. In which case, you want to let it run through slowly so that people can acquire immunity, and so that the worst cases can be managed as we go along. I think that's the best possible outcome at this stage. I think it's basically breach containment. But the problem isn't so much the UK or the US or Japan or South Korea. It's what if this disease gets into other countries where people are malnourished, relatively speaking, or there aren't the medical facilities, relatively speaking. And we're still probably about a year out from having a vaccine. Whether this becomes a new regular disease, it's unclear. But I think the fact that it emerged in China was both good and bad, because a totalitarian state is better able to control things, but they also covered up information, which isn't so good. And then, of course, the more it spreads, the more chance there are of mutations, taking it to a deadlier degree or a more problematic degree. Frankly, the state of mind I'm in, killing off a significant percentage of the human population seems like a blessing. Speaking of poorer countries, North Korea has quarantined all foreigners. Not that there's that many in North Korea, but it's 380 foreigners in North Korea. They've quarantined the lot in an attempt to stop the coronavirus from breaking out into their general population, because they are not set up to deal with it, and there's a lot of malnourishment and people are a lot more vulnerable. So you would expect, if COVID-19 got out in North Korea, you'd expect a hell of a lot more deaths than you see elsewhere. In South Korea, 7 people have died out of 763 people infected, so you can see it's around that 1% number, a bit below. And nearly 8,000 soldiers have been quarantined. So that's interesting. It's also had a big effect on the Asian stock markets. Disease, it's something we're not so used to anymore, but it can have massive, far-reaching effects on the military, on the security situation, on the markets, trade, all of these kind of things. It all has big knock-on effects, and this is a relatively non-deadly disease, and we're likely to see more diseases in future like this for various reasons. So we're kind of lucky that this one isn't that fatal, but I think it's also, in a good way, it's helping us identify cracks and problems in the system that SARS and other previous infections should have, but we'll see. So over here, the Labour leadership contest is in full swing. People are starting to vote. It's a three-way contest now. You've got Keir Starmer, Lisa Nandy, and Rebecca Long Bailey. Long Bailey is the continuity Corbynism candidate. Bad idea, so we can take her out. She's not doing that well anyway. Lisa Nandy, don't know that much about, which is a problem. Keir Starmer was quite an outspoken Remainer. He is the more Blairite candidate, I would say, which will immediately turn a lot of people against him, but I also think he's the best bet Labour has to regain some credibility, to be more electable moving forward, and I think he has the right perception of what went wrong, when a lot of the left or the woke side of the Labour Party doesn't really understand what went wrong, and how or why. So if I was a member of the Labour Party, I'd be backing Keir Starmer, even though he's more centrist. I think you gotta be pragmatic. Who has any chance of winning, who has any chance of turning things around for Labour, who has any chance remotely in the next 5-10 years of enacting any Labour policy, getting any power in government, starting to reverse this horrible shit pit we found ourselves in. I mean, they don't need to reverse the percentages that much to get some power back next election. Remember, this landslide victory that the Tories got was only a 1% shift in vote. And Labour hemorrhaged most of its support to Remain parties, not to Brexit parties. They did hemorrhage support to both, but the majority of it went to Remain parties. And the Tories are already fucking up, doing anything for these new areas they've collected in the north. They just can't help themselves, it seems like, or they want to secure their base in the south. So it is remotely possible, if they pick the right candidate, if they shift their policies and so on, if they stay on that kind of pro-Remain, pro-EU, let's soften Brexit as much as possible, let's make the best deals possible. If they take that position, it's remotely possible they could win next election. And it's certainly more possible they could win in the election after that. But the far left ones, the woke ones, they're more interested in being right as they see it than getting into power and enacting anything, which is something Tony Blair was commenting on, of all people. Of course, he fucked up when it came to the war. The owner of The Sun has reported a £68 million loss as newspaper sales fall. Now, part of this will be just down to the general decline in print media and traditional media. Some of it is due to the fact that The Sun are scum. More recently, they've had problems around the high-profile Love Island suicide and everything, though that won't be reflected in these figures. So watch out for the next quarter's figures, perhaps, or the next year's figures, perhaps, as that begins to bite. There are whole areas of the country that refuse to stock or buy The Sun. People have taken to hiding it behind things in supermarkets and so on. So yeah, I mean, this is a rabidly populist newspaper. Their sales have fallen by 8% over the last year to only 1.38 million papers in the year to July last year. It's still the most popular newspaper in the UK. We have a population of, 60-something million? Let's have a quick look. Hooray for the internet. UK population, 66.5 million. So very roughly about 1 in 60 million people read The Sun. And it is a scummy, shitty paper, but it does still have disproportionate impact. It's one of those ones that's available for free lots of places, or that people share, so the circulation figures aren't the full story. That's the daily. The Sunday Sun sold an average of 1.16 million copies a week, which is 110,000 fewer than the year before. Legacy media is a problem. In some ways, it's good that it's dissolving, but we are also seeing the BBC under attack, Channel 4 under attack. More credible news media under assault. People don't seem to want the news; they want A news, and in that environment, you'd think the Sun would be doing a lot better than it is, but it isn't, because the Sun is nakedly and blatantly partisan. More and more people are getting their news online. The Sun has shifted a lot of its business online. It runs a lot of things like Bingo, all kinds of other things under its kind of Sun Media Group label. So the newspaper story isn't the whole story. This is very definitely this legacy issue, but it's still interesting to note that their circulation can fall by 8% in a single year. So keep an eye on that, and keep an eye on similar figures from other papers. I expect most of them are in decline. Some of the more left-wing papers might get a little bit of a boost because the Tories are in power and people want to feel like they're part of a community that's resisting. So maybe the Guardian will go up a little bit, perhaps, or the Mirror. Remains to be seen. But the Sun is certainly hurting, and I wouldn't expect any of those to go up. I talk about this quite a lot on the channel, but we have a real problem with housing here in the UK, social housing. When Margaret Thatcher was in power, she gave people the right to buy their council houses, but did not release money in order for councils to build replacement housing and so on. The idea was that people would be able to buy their council houses relatively cheap, then get on the property ladder and work their way up. Of course, it doesn't work like that. It created a shortage in the housing supply, which drove the prices up, which was great for people who bought their council houses because they rapidly appreciated in value, but not good for first-time buyers or anyone who needed social housing. All kinds of problems. Home ownership is a really big thing in British culture. Bricks and mortar. People like to own it. And lots of foreign oligarchs and others buy up a whole bunch of property and just kind of leave it fallow, because it's just like a bank for them that appreciates an interest better than actual banks do. By and large, property prices on the whole continue to go up in the UK. But this has created this massive housing shortage, which contributes to homelessness and all kinds of other problems, housing insecurity, all the rest of it. We really need to end right to buy. I understand why it appeals to people, why people felt it was a good policy and so on, but without commensurate house building going on to reintroduce that supply, problems. There's other issues around UK councils and how they handle rent and council housing and all the rest of it, but it really does go back to Thatcher. So when I say certain politicians do things that you'll end up dealing with for years, for decades, I'm speaking from experience. I think the mental health system in the States, after Reagan put a bunch of people in the community for care, I think that's another instance you can look at and say, yeah, we're still paying for what someone did in the 80s. But yes, there is a huge housing gap. The BBC's reported on this today. This is the gap between the current housing stock and the number of people looking for somewhere to live, needing a decent home to live in. And it's a huge problem. And rent prices and the prices of houses are huge. So they've got an example here that's typical. Someone spending more than a third of their pay on rent for a shared flat in Brixton in South London, which isn't a particularly highly priced area, though it's being gentrified and hipsterized as well. But this is someone sharing a small flat in a not particularly posh area of London, right? And that's over a third of the money they take in each month is going on rent. Landlords are particularly callous. A lot of people have become landlords as a way to make a constant passive income, but then they're not held to account particularly, and there's been a lot of resistance to changes in the law from Tory landlords or from landowning families to do about this. So there's been a spate of no-fault evictions. This is where where private landlords are allowed to throw people out on short notice without having to have a particularly good reason. So we need more renters protections and so on as well. But the real problem is the supply and demand. Too much demand, not enough supply. Prices are high. Very few people, or increasingly few people, can afford to buy anywhere. This is how you get 40-year-olds still living at home with their parents and so on, for example. It's no fault of their own. It's not an indication that they're a loser. It's an indication that there just isn't the housing. And when you're blowing that much money on rent, which is essentially just evaporating into the ether, how can you save to buy a house when the mortgages are that high that you'd be paying more than that every month? And job security isn't particularly a thing that exists anymore. You can see how the issues are just kind of stacking up here. There was a poll of more than 2,000 people by the Affordable Housing Commission, and about 13% of adults said their mental health was negatively affected by their housing situation. Insecure housing, like insecure employment, takes a toll on people's mental health because you're constantly worrying, am I going to have a roof over my head? It's just... how do you solve it? More council housing, or making rules that mean that property can't just lie fallow, that it has to be rented out. Then renters protections, price controls, all these kinds of things need to be done. We built about 1.2 million fewer houses than we should have, and they tend to only build the houses and the flats where they're highly priced. Yeah, it makes sense if you're a commercial business to do that because you're wanting to make a profit either on rent or on sales. But it's not good news for the people that need the housing, who tend to be lower down the scale. If we continue building at current rates, it'll take about 15 years to close the gap, if that gap is closable at that rate, which it probably isn't. And the other big problem, like I was just intimating, is that a lot of this housing is being built, but it's not affordable housing. It's not cheap housing. It's not being built in cheaper areas. It's not being built in such a way that people can afford it or afford to rent it. Yeah, it's a huge issue. And they got more examples here, like a woman now 32 has been saving money since she was 14 in the hopes of being able to put down a deposit on a house that's something affordable, but it's just not there. And the previous generation doesn't necessarily have the money. I'm extremely lucky in that I inherited this property that I live in. There's no way I could afford to live here otherwise at all. I don't know where I'd be or what I'd be doing otherwise with my mental health issues and others. And there's plenty of far less lucky people out there who do have to deal with that situation. And I was looking through the new benefit system they want to put us all on. Shit, I've forgotten its name, which is bad. But if I was swapped from the current benefit system that I'm on to that, my income would drop by 2/3. It's pretty fucking drastic, isn't it? I have managed previously without government assistance, but to be perfectly honest, my mental health has been getting worse, especially the anxiety. I don't really have the option of getting a normie job. I do what I can. I hustle as much as I'm able to, given my health and so on. And fortunately, I have a partner who works. But if that situation changed in some way, and knowing that I would then go on to this new system and lose 2/3 of the assistance that I get, which isn't enough anyway, that's terrifying. And then being on a list for social housing. My brother's in low income work. His partner has had a bit of a rough old time in the past. They were on a list for housing, and it took a very long time to get there. And they've got kids, which leaps them to the front of the queue. It's just the whole situation's fucked. Also, we have a big problem in that where we are building houses isn't a very good a good idea. We keep building on floodplains. So a lot of that housing that has been built is in areas that are environmentally unsound. Like here, the village and other villages near us, there's a lot of building going on. I try not to be a NIMBY, but they're building on old water meadows and flat areas that are important for drainage. And we've had problems with the drainage in this village for decades. So building where they are is going to make that worse. And they're building where places are more likely to get flooded. It's just stupid. But I guess it's because it's flat and it's picturesque and all the rest of it. But nobody seems to be thinking long term particularly. So where you do have affordable housing, it may well be on a floodplain where you can't get insurance. So build high, I guess. Maybe we should start making stilt houses. Moving on, because there's stuff I want to do today, and I'm not feeling very well. So the UK is moving into the negotiating stage of Brexit during our sort of extended honeymoon period for about a year, which we may or may not get an extension on, where we're held to EU rules but have no say. The government still isn't particularly prepared and is entering into negotiations and is still lying about how likely it is that we're going to get any particular deals or anything. But everyone that the UK is talking to and trying to make deals with is constantly warning that it'll take longer, or you're not at the front of the queue, or whatever else, whether it's people outside the EU or whether it's countries in the EU itself, or whatever. So Emmanuel Macron has said, I'm not sure if there's going to be a UK-EU trade deal by the end of the year, which means there probably won't be. And lots of different countries are making different demands that should be in whatever deal that we make, like access to our fishing waters and so on. It's just our government is hopelessly optimistic, and they don't seem to understand that now we're outside of the EU is going to act in the interests of its member states against us. You can see that happening with Gibraltar and so on. And this is somehow a surprise to people. I don't really understand how it's a surprise to me. It's like you break up with your girlfriend or whatever, and then you want your stuff back, and she's like, "No, fuck off. You have to come when I'm in. I've changed the locks. Yeah, you want your shit," and throwing it out the window. You can't really expect someone that you've wronged and split up with to treat you well, necessarily, especially if they've taken up with someone else. You know, they're going to be more concerned about doing the right thing for them rather than you. And we're just completely at odds, particularly fishing. That's been the iconic Brexit issue, even though it's less than 1% of the UK economy. I think it's less than half of 1% of the UK economy. It might be like 0.6% or something, whereas services is about a third, and that's going to be hit the hardest. None of this has made any sense since the start. It's going to be horrible for everybody, and now people are feigning surprise that the EU is going to be concerned with what's right for its members rather than us. Quelle surprise. Fucking hell. Excuse me. Right, flat earthism. Why is that in the notable regular news rather than me taking the piss? Well, this is both funny and not funny. It's kind of tragic. A particularly high-profile flat earther, Mad Mike Hughes, has been killed after his homemade rocket crashed. Why was he strapping himself to a homemade rocket? He wanted to go up into the air and get a view of the world from quite high up and judge for himself whether it was flat or whether the curve was visible, all of that kind of stuff. Why he couldn't just send a camera up, I don't know. I guess they think the cameras are tampered with or something. Who the fuck knows? But he decided to launch himself into the air in this rocket, despite being 64 and his only qualifications being those of a limo driver. And he's dead because he didn't trust anybody. It's sad, it's tragic, it's funny. Why he couldn't just send a camera, I don't know. His efforts were being followed by the Science Channel, I think. He's got a record of being a daredevil. He had the world record for the longest jump in a limousine back in 2002, I think. I just don't know how to attack this, really. It's obviously dumb. Even if you believe the Earth is flat, why launch yourself into the air when you could send cameras, even film cameras, if you're that paranoid, and that would have given you the same information, the same view. Why he did it, I don't know. Was it for publicity, to help raise the money by being a daredevil? I mean, he's got form on that. It's just such an utterly pointless waste of life. I mean, I guess at least it's not anti-vaccination. Yeah, it's so obviously absurd. But the guy's dead. You know, on the one hand, I want to just kind of go, "You're a fucking idiot. You deserved it." You know, that's evolution in action, which you probably also don't believe in. But it's just so utterly stupid. I hardly dare go look, but I expect there are conspiracy theories that it was sabotage or something already doing the rounds. What a pointless waste of human life for stupidity. Yeah, if we didn't know whether the Earth was round or flat, then maybe something like this would be justified. But still, just send a fucking camera. Here's some good news for once on the health front, and I do like to try and get a bit of good news in these things. People call it AI. It's not AI, it's learning algorithms and more powerful computers processing protein folds and all of that sort of thing. But a new antibiotic has been discovered using artificial intelligence, so they say. What they mean is learning algorithms. So a new type of antibiotic, we don't find those often enough, and this does seem to be a particularly powerful one. It's one of the most powerful ones discovered since penicillin, if I remember correctly. I did actually read up on this over the weekend. So they used this powerful algorithm to analyze about 100 million different chemical compounds, and it only took a few days because of the power of modern computing. And they found this new compound that's able to kill about 35 types of deadly bacteria. Antibiotic resistance is an increasing issue around the world. Antibiotic-resistant infections are up about 9% just in England and Wales from 2017 to 2018. It's about 61,000 cases. People don't take their antibiotics properly. They take them when they don't need them. They come off them when they should keep taking them. You know, all kinds of issues. But the potential here for big data crunching and learning algorithms to discover useful new compounds is enormous. So yeah, that's hopeful. Big data is really this place where a whole mess of human advancement can now take place. We now have the capacity to grind that data and to find the useful bits and pieces in a way that humans can't necessarily. I mean, we are pattern recognition machines. We often see patterns where they don't even exist. That using learning algorithms to do this is a lot faster, a lot more specialized, and it should get better through iterative changes. The only drawback is we don't necessarily understand how learning algorithms work. So we can't necessarily understand after a few iterations how or why the computer is finding these, which means it can be hard for us to transfer that knowledge in other ways or follow up elsewhere, follow up promising lines of inquiry and so on. There was a famous case fairly early on in the application of neural networks and learning algorithms where they were trying to train it to recognize men or women, but it was recognizing something else that just coincidentally happened to marry up to the same thing. So they trained it on this one set of photos, got it to 100% accuracy or something, introduced another set of photos, and it was completely wrong because it had been trained for the wrong thing. Ideally, you need these systems to explain to you how they're arriving at their decisions. Because other than that first sort of initial thrust of data and that first initial thrust of training, you don't know how they come to those decisions. And as anyone who's on YouTube knows, algorithms often get it wrong. So, yeah, it's wonderful. There are amazing things that are going to continue to come out of this big data. I would, if I had the money to invest, I would be investing it in these kind of big data oriented sort of number crunching firms, because that's where so many innovations are going to be coming from. But retain a note of caution. This was controversial on social media over the weekend, but there's a study released by Brown University that has shown fully a quarter of posts about climate change on Twitter are being either written or promulgated by bots. And for some reason, a lot of people were up in arms about that, saying, "Oh, no, they're just trying to discredit climate skeptics," and I think they discredit themselves. But we all learn certain tricks, I think, internet veterans, to spot when things aren't necessarily kosher about social media accounts or emails or whatever. You know, it just because it looks like it's come from PayPal. What's the return email address? You know, is the IP hidden? Is it up to date? You know, those sort of things you notice. Or if you're arguing with someone on Twitter, if there's pronouns in their bio and all of this other stuff, they're probably not an honest interlocutor, right? Or if they have a footballer as a banner image, then that seems to be fairly likely that they're a bot, usually a pro-Brexit bot. And then you've got this issue. There are botnets. We know there are botnets. Spamming emails and so on often come from botnets. They can be used for distributed denial of service attacks. So we know there are bots out there. We know they're for hire. We know that there are vested interests that want to try and push back against climate concerns, Green New Deal, all the rest of it, and that they've got deep pockets. So it's completely credible that there would be large numbers of bots spreading disinformation about climate change or vaccinations or whatever. We know that there are government agencies like that Chinese unit. It's just got a string of numerals. I can't remember the exact number, but there's a specialist Chinese cyber warfare unit. There's a specialist US cyber warfare unit, a UK one, a Russian one, probably several. Yeah, we know they're trying to bend the needle on various political things, sow dissent, sow disinformation, that the petrochemical companies might spend a couple of $100,000 to pay, sort of grey market botnets to spread disinformation. This isn't by any means any sort of stretch of the imagination. In fact, you don't even need to spend a lot of money. You can set up a bunch of free nonsense accounts yourself and run it off a computer somewhere or through a proxy, whatever else. Yeah, it's not really that difficult. And lunatics are certainly more willing to make the effort to do that sort of thing. If you've ever argued with a 9/11 truther or a creationist, you know that just one real person can witter on for hours and hours and hours, restating the same point over and over again and never making any progress in the argument. So why people think this is somehow trying to discredit climate skeptics when they do that themselves, I don't know. Yeah, this is certainly well within the bounds of possibility. These are things that we know are happening. So why anyone's insulted or upset by the revelation, nor there's much of a revelation that this is going on, I don't know. Of course, there is the other side to this, which is that lots of people will dismiss you as a bot just for disagreeing with them, even if you've got hundreds of thousands of individual tweets that show your humanity, and if you're responding in real time and in a creative way, to demonstrate that you're a human. Being dismissed as a bot can be hurtful, but yeah, you gotta watch out for this stuff. In advertising, they say you have to be exposed to the same message 3 times before it will start to take effect and perhaps modify your behavior and maybe lead you to buy the product. So flooding messages like this onto social media, it is an issue, and you will get repeatedly exposed to it, and that's when it starts to get traction. What do you do about it? I have no fucking idea. There's legitimate uses for Twitter bots and scheduled posting and all of these kind of things. And how do you differentiate between a corporate account that automatically posts certain things and a malicious bot? How do you differentiate between a crazy person who's posting an anti-climate change nonsense post every 30 seconds, day and night? How do you differentiate that from a bot? It's not easy, and takes us back to those learning algorithms, which are insufficient to the task. But there just aren't enough people on Earth willing to work cheaply enough to do human moderation. So, what do we do? I don't know. It's an issue. Right. I'm a fan of the NHS. It's fantastic value for money. It costs per head a lot less than the existing American healthcare system, and has better outcomes. America's something like number 36, number 37 in the WHO global rankings. UK with its NHS is somewhere around number 16. Those are old figures, but I haven't found anything more up to date. It's unlikely to have changed much. I think Obamacare bumped America up a position or two, and underfunding and deliberate sabotage by Tory governments and austerity may have bumped us down a couple, but we're still well ahead of the US and a lot cheaper. I think the NHS is a fantastic thing. One of the most perplexing things watching an American political cycle going on is seeing ordinary working class Americans shouting and screaming about communism. Saying, no, I want to both die of cancer and bankrupt my family. How dare you offer me healthcare? It's just boggling. But the NHS does have its problems, particularly around mental health care, which is where I tend to intersect with the NHS a lot more. So there's a story, again on the BBC today, how the NHS took 18 months to help after a guy's suicide attempt. It's massively oversubscribed, the mental health care services. There isn't enough investment in it. Theresa May talked about investing money there, but it was a pittance. I think it would have been something like £280 extra per mental health unit in the UK once you figured it all out. It's just not enough. There isn't the staff. It's not the NHS's fault. Also, the NHS operates on a triage system, so the people that need the help the most, wherever the money can be spent to the greatest effect, that's how the NHS operates, rather than the weight of your pocketbook, which is how it operates in the States. Right? It's on the basis of need and cost effectiveness. That's understandable. It produces the best outcomes for the greatest number of people. I'm all for that, but it does mean that people like me and like this poor guy kind of fall through the gaps quite a lot. And the NHS does tend to, because it doesn't have that much money in its mental health services, it tends to go for a one-size-fits-all sort of approach. So everyone gets cognitive behaviour therapy, whether it helps them or not. And the first port of call is usually your family doctor, who will give you pills and say, let's try this and see how it goes. I'm fortunate in that I've kind of trained my local doctors to be a bit more understanding and capable. And I've even allowed myself to be a guinea pig for student doctors. So I'm doing my part. Are you? So this guy, he turned up at A&E after a suicide attempt, but barely got any follow-up or assistance for 18 months after trying to kill himself. And this is a story that we tend to see, particularly for men, particularly for single men. Depression we're seeing rise. Last year, UK suicide rates rose for the first time since 2013. I can believe that. And you'll groan, but I do think Brexit is part of that. A friend of mine tried to kill himself because he's basically been split apart from any chance of ever being with his girlfriend because of Brexit. Yeah, they wanted to get married. Not going to happen. I'm still trying to help him, but we'll see how that goes. I mean, again, experts are saying, right, this is what we need to do. We need to do follow-up. We need to make sure that there's some sort of aftercare plan for people who turn up to A&E having self-harmed or attempted suicide. So I have been diagnosed since 2007, and I have had 3 suicide attempts and 2 bouts of self-harm in that period. I've gotten pretty good at sort of self-diagnosing when I'm really bad. I'm not particularly great at the moment, as it happens, but nowhere near suicide or self-harm, so don't worry. But getting help was very difficult. There were constant multi-month waiting periods to see a therapist or to see a psychiatrist. Initially, I was on a 8-month waiting list to go to the local community mental health team. I had a suicide attempt in the period leading up to that, and they bumped me up, so I only ended up waiting about 3 months for that. Then I had to attend these CBT meetings and this therapy appointment for about 3 months before I could see the psychiatrist, who was the only person who was actually remotely useful and recommended some extra drugs for me to take, including an antipsychotic. That was fun. I'm not psychotic. This is the thing you have to understand. A lot of these medications have particular uses, but they also have off-label uses. And tailoring your cocktail of pills to be the right one that will actually help you takes time and effort. And it takes a while for most of these psychiatric drugs to kick in. So you may take a drug for a couple of weeks, then discover that it's not for you. A couple of weeks of withdrawal from that with other side effects. Then you'll go on to try the next drug, and so on and so on and so on, until you find the right drug and the right mix of drugs that puts you on a more even keel. It is still worth doing. I mean, you wouldn't turn away a wheelchair if both your legs were broken, right? Lots of people are afraid of drugs. I understand, but you've got to look at it from a practical point of view. But my point is that it was the suicide attempt that bumped me up the queue and got me seen sooner. This is what we mean about triage. But does that mean people are going to start faking it so they get seen sooner? I don't know. There needs to be money put into this, right? And that's extremely unlikely to happen with the current government. I think a lot of nations are facing this choice. It's like, do we want to live in a kind, caring society with a decent safety net that can catch people, get them better even, or just at least stop things getting worse? Is that what we want, and are we willing to pay for it? You can appeal to people on a financial basis and say that, like most things, if you collectivize and pay for it, it's cheaper, and collectively as a society, we all benefit from that in a way that far outweighs the cost. But in many ways, that's kind of bowing to the financial, fiscal argument, which isn't necessarily a good way to go, because you shouldn't have to. Human life has some sort of intrinsic value to other humans. Right? We recognize that spark of consciousness in others. Yeah, this is something I care about because it affects me, but I would care about it even if it didn't affect me. These waiting times for mental health care are a problem, but they don't get the attention that physical care does. Invisible illnesses just don't get the same attention, even when it comes to suicides. I think also partly because what care we do have is quite rightly targeted on women and families, single mothers. It's not targeted on men, who, despite them having the higher suicide rate and so on. I mean, you want families to be safe and secure first. It's money, really, and we're going to need more specialists, which is going to be harder to get post-Brexit as well. So, huzzah. Right, any comments or questions? Let's see what you've been saying. Rob says, supply and demand is, of course, the biggest problem. Regional demographics are a close second. Yeah, and it's not immigration. This is the thing a lot of people say, but it's a problem that transcends immigration issues. The immigrants pay more into the economy than they take out, but that value for money is not being seen by people at the lower end of society. We could take that 1.6 times from EU immigrants as were, and we could have ploughed that into housing. It's 1.1 to 1.3 times as much as they take out for non-EU migrants, which are about to go up. So, even though they pay in more than they take out, financially the country is now going to be worse off again because of Brexit. But that money should not be going to employers. It should not be going into corporate welfare. It should be going into offsetting these perceived problems so that white working class and underclass people can start seeing the benefits of immigration in the same way that elites have up until this point. If you saw and understood that the revenue coming from necessary migrant work was being ploughed back into the community, into hospitals, into schools, into transport infrastructure, things like that, I think a lot of the complaints would disappear. But Ben says NIMBY Grim Jim with his fake painted cardboard speed camera outside his house. No, no. The village that I live in is very, very true blue Tory, and there is a lot of NIMBYism. People in this area have successfully campaigned both against a local incineration power plant that was going to be built up at Barton Stacey or somewhere. That's now been turned down. And against a wind farm. There's no pleasing some people. We're on a fairly decent area for a wind farm, Chalk Hills, and I think they're kind of beautiful, really. But NIMBYs have successfully stopped that going on. We are in a preservation area, which explains some of it. Some very old houses. The building opposite me, that way, is an old bakery that was in the Domesday Book, 1066. So getting on for 1,000 years old, and the main structure of the building is still there. It just goes to show. Then some talk about bots. Ben says, I've heard it argued that the NHS is effectively subsidised by and benefits from the pharmaceutical company-funded studies in the US, e.g. the NHS directly owes a lot to the US private system. I've heard the opposite, that the UK university system and state-sponsored research effectively subsidises the US system, and also that because we've got this centralised NHS system, our patient data, when suitably anonymised, is of enormous value to a lot of research companies and so on. I think that's part of what US pharmaceutical firms will want out of any trade deal with the UK that the US gets. So I think it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, really. I mean, a huge amount of everything great that we see around us, from mobile phones to Velcro to non-stick surfaces to a hell of a lot of pharmaceuticals to the internet. A lot of this is funded from public research, not private. Also, I think a lot of research benefits from having a non-commercial set of interests. People are paranoid about big pharma, they don't want to cure anything. Well, one solution to that concern is to have state research, right? Private's better at some things, state's better at others. Yeah. Rob says the key issue is that where the jobs that young people want to do are located, property prices are hugely inflated due to competition for property in commutable/local areas. Yep. So like the music industry in London or design, things like that, and a lot of early positions in these kind of glamorous industries or these high-tech industries and so on, they pay for shit. Like a common pathway into STEM is via technical support, which pays for shit, first-line support, and is incredibly stressful. So you have to stick it out for a long time before you might get promoted into doing something else. I was doing tech support 2 years before I ended up being promoted to web design back in the day. And tech support is massively stressful. And then you've got the house sharing, which can be a source of stress. Rentals, which is a lot of stress. If you want to work somewhere where the work is, like London or Birmingham, the prices do go up. And then they're also driven up by the fact that there's no social housing, and by particularly in London, oligarchs buying up streets and streets of property that then sit empty. Say that they can't leave them empty, that they have to be up for rent, and rent controls and things. Yeah, that's the way to go. And then they've also clamped down on squatting, which doesn't help matters either. I don't know. In San Francisco, they've got those communal living spaces now, where basically all you get is a bed in this big communal living space, which doesn't seem to me to be a particularly good solution, and one that could lead to a spread of disease, which is worth thinking about with the coronavirus. Rob says, to me the solution is to break the glamour associated with cities and disperse industry, especially in the creative industries. The internet has made this easier than ever. That's a really good point, and it's an interesting one. So there was a brief period before fibre optic really took off where a lot of creative and design industries and sort of high-tech industries, light industrial, computing, computer gaming, software, hardware design, that stuff, that was doing that. It was getting hugely distributed. And again, locally, a lot of old barns were bought up and converted into office space and so on. They had ISDN lines run out to them because that was the thing at the time. And it was really interesting because you ended up with this kind of dispersed system where people didn't have to be in the cities. And this was actually really prevalent in the period after I lost my job and was looking around trying to find opportunities. A lot of these companies that I was looking to work for at the time were based out of old barns or farmhouses or whatever, which they'd converted into offices and run these, for the time, high-speed internet lines into. Then fibre really took off, and if you wanted the fast connections that you really needed, you had to move at least back into the towns, if not the cities, and so that whole thing reversed. These days, fibre is rolling out to the country again. Like, I've got a 50 meg pipe here. There's nothing really to stop companies doing that again and moving out to the country again. There's also not a great deal of reason to have things like call centres. People could work from home and have calls routed to their mobiles or their headsets on their desktop machines or whatever, work more flexible hours. But there seems to be this reluctance, particularly in more conventional industries, to do that. Yeah, if I was a businessman starting up a call centre now, I would say, well, we can save a shitload of money if we don't bother with anything but the most minimal bricks and mortar, and we allow people to work from home on their mobile phone, whatever else, on their home computers. That'll be great for them. It'll ease childcare issues and all that sort of thing. It'll save us a shitload of money. It makes sense to do that. What do I know, eh? I think they're worried about productivity, but certainly anecdotally, when I used to work from home, when I had a proper job, I got a week's work done in 2 days working from home, and could then kind of relax and chill out a bit. And I think there have been studies that show that people's productivity does go up. Even though there are more distractions at home, and it's easier to goof off and work in your pants or whatever else, but those are all positives as far as I'm concerned. Right, I should better jog on and try and do some work or something. I'll just go over the sort of housekeeping again. Not feeling particularly well, brain and sniffles and stuff, so dosed up on anti-sneezing medication and stuff. So I don't know how much stuff I'm going to do this week video wise. I feel like I'm making really kind of glacial progress on the creative stuff that I'm doing because I've been prioritizing self-care, but it's causing a great deal of stress not to be accomplishing much. So yeah, I would love for this channel to have more subscribers from my main channel, so if you want to retweet or share on Facebook or whatever else, it would be greatly appreciated. Do hit subscribe if you're new, and I'll probably see you next week. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Zang.